Good evening. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. Well, it seems the Gen Z revolution has now landed on the continent of Africa. If you've been following, of course, what has been happening in the island of Madagascar, an army colonel said that the military has taken charge of the island nation after its parliament voted to impeach President Andry Rajoelina following weeks of that very same youth-led anti-government protests. What we saw were celebrations in the street of the capital, Antananarivo, following a Madagascan colonel's announcement, which came almost immediately after parliament voted to impeach Rajoelina, who fled the country after soldiers joined the mass protests. It's another military takeover within Africa, but what does this mean from first a Gen Z perspective and of course the future of Madagascar? Joining me now, I'd like to welcome researcher at the Thabo Mbeki African School on Public and International Affairs, Advocate Sipho Mantula. Advocate, good having you on. Thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thank you, Faraz, and greetings to your viewers and Jumbo Africa.
No, absolute pleasure. Advocate, how have we got here? I mean, we've seen Gen Z protests happening across the world, a lot in Europe, South America, but now we finally had it on our continent.
Absolutely, but as you talk about the youth protest or the youth revolution or Generation Z, MADA, which is Madagascar. Let's look back also in the history of Madagascar. Generally, when Madagascar was liberated from France and Britain in the late 60s, or around 1972, there was already another protest by the young people, and particularly university student against that then government in the late 70s. But as you move towards 1991 also, there are still pockets of unrest from the communities, from the civil society, and from the military. Until 2002, it went to 2009. Now, when Rajoelina came into power, you need to understand that same army unit that has removed him is the same army unit that assisted him when he removed Mark Ravalomanana. But let's go back again, Faraz, again. The Generation Z beyond Nepal and Europe, we need to also pick it up from Kenya last year. What we saw in Kenya last year, what we see in Morocco now going on, it is the Generation Z 212 now. So if you can look at the question of Generation Z, Madagascar, it started last month around water and electricity for us. Those were the push and the pull factors, saying we need food, clothes, and shelter, simple. But now the military was already fatigued now to say, but what is happening around our community is also affecting us. Hence, there was the tools down, if you can call it in a trade union language, they say it was a tools down by the military towards the last week of the last week of October. I mean, not the last week of October, the first week of October. Now
yes.
We saw the military fatigue, and others are calling it a military mutiny, or was it a military coup? But let's also credit the youth of Madagascar, who were very vocal and clear that they want to deal with issues of governance, but also basic human rights issues.
And that's the thing, isn't it, Advocate? Because when you listen to the voices on the street and those young voices, they were fed up. And a lot of their complaints with regards to the now impeached President Rajoelina was that he had closed his ears to everything that was brought up. And you've mentioned it. No water, no electricity, lack of basic services, and the military is going to suffer the same consequences of these lack of decisions that have not been executed by the government. And we know that when it comes to many African countries, if not all, the military has the strong arm to really allow for these protests to happen and ultimately lead to some sort of coup or overthrow within the government.
Correctly, but Faraz, let's look at an important issue that beyond that I will call it evacuated or the exiled President Rajoelina, the youngest, they will call him a baby-faced president, and he was also a person who was into music. He was once the DJ, by the way, the youngest president of the island at the age of 34. But look at his collapse. His collapse is that you could not understand or grasp that the youth were also by saying, for me, Faraz, have you been to Madagascar? I know the levels of poverty. I've seen that in that island, even if they will thrive with rice and mangoes and fish and a lot of indigenous food, one of the things that is there is the elite, and it's also the occupation of France in Madagascar. Most of the Malagasy people there, Faraz, if I can tell you, they've got dual citizenship. Hence, you find that the current exiled president, he was assisted by the French to flee Madagascar and want to talk through their Facebook to say he wants to dissolve government. But also look at another scenario. Madagascar was the chair of SADC. Now, what will happen to the chairpersonship of Madagascar for SADC? South Africa was deputizing. So there's a likely that South Africa might also has to take over the SADC chairpersonship prematurely, because it was supposed to chair in 2026. But now you have this vacuum in the region, as Madagascar was the elected chair. For the first time, by the way, Madagascar being the chairperson of SADC, and look what has happened now. I've seen the two communiques coming from the AU Peace and Security Council, one communique from SADC Troika on peace and security and defense. But one I saw from Peace and Security Council of the AU, which I think is relevant to our engagement now, is where the AU now recognizes that the issues of young people in the African continent must be given a necessary attention. And that's where me and you, as we were talking about this Generation Z, that it is now coming to revisit and coming to haunt us in the African continent, and this time going to the island of Madagascar.
And again, there's something important that you bring up there, Advocate Mantula, is this AU statements are always knee-jerk reactions. A lot of them, if not all, are knee-jerk reactions. If this isn't a wake-up call for the African Union to address these problems across the continent, then we really don't know what it's going to be, because there had to be a sense of understanding that these youth-led protests are because of the basic service deliveries which these governments are practically not doing for their country.
Absolutely, Faraz, what you are raising, but let's not rush to the AU. Let's rush to Gaborone and to South Africa and Malawi, because South Africa deputizing Madagascar and looking at the regional economic challenges in the continent. The issue of water and electricity, they also face us in South Africa. They also face many young people. And remember, when you talk of Generation Z, I want to take your viewers also to say the youth who were born between 1997 and 2008 are the ones who are feeling this pinch once more. Remember that in 2008, we had what we call the global crisis.
Yes.
And this global financial crisis is the one that has pushed many young people. And as you said, it is important, even for the SADC to respond late. I can tell you, Faraz, by a week ago, in fact, when this protest started by the youth of Madagascar, already 6 European countries in Madagascar were already calling for the national dialogue. But you find that in Africa and in the neighboring countries, we are very quiet. We are not always, I can use the word, not proactive. We are reactionary. We just react on the situation. But we don't look also at the question of the African continent have many young people. It's a youthful continent. And it is important that we arrest some of the concerns and engage these young people. And in Madagascar, like I said to you earlier, the levels of poverty are very disappointing because of the elites that have benefited in the natural resources of Madagascar.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Advocate Sipho Mantula. As this military takeover has occurred, will it solve the issues of the young people who have, of course, been leading these protests? But what about the rest of the continent. And right here at home, there's still many municipalities that do not deliver basic service deliveries for the communities. What lessons can be learned with that? My conversation with Advocate Mantula continues after the break. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Advocate Sipho Mantula. We're, of course, looking at the military takeover that has happened in Madagascar. This after its President Rajoelina has been impeached from Parliament and, of course, has left the country. Again, thank you so much for staying with us, Advocate Mantula. Advocate Mantula, right, so we got the military coming. Of course, it's not an overnight solving of the deeper lying societal issues within Madagascar. But can the people of Madagascar really trust this military government, or should it morph into a potential democratic government to solve the issues, especially that of the youth?
For us, I think you are raising an important issue. What I have learned is that the interim leadership of the military that has come into power, they've assured the young people that they will be integrated in this government of transitional government, if you can use that word, that they are going to say, I mean, they are saying they will need 24 months. And remember that script, we have seen it before in the Sahel, where the military leaders come in and they say after 2 years or 3 years, there will be elections, there will be referendum. Now, what you see in Madagascar is the same script we saw in Sudan again, after the removal of Bashir, that it was the women of Sudan and the young people who took Bashir out of power. But when the generals came in, they did not maintain what we will always call a military and civilian relation. How do they relate when it comes to governance, when it comes to provide services to the citizens? Because what is important for us, it is that most of the generations that must always remember Thomas Sankara. As you know that today we will remember Thomas Sankara. They must remember Thomas Sankara when he turned the military for not being a military holding guns, but the military that provides services from agriculture, from health services, from infrastructure. So we need to change the thinking of the military in Africa again, that the military must be of service to the community and not the other way around. And hence I say to you, this transitional government, I'm not sure whether the AU will recognize it, whether will the SADC recognize it, because you need to understand the AU works with a template that all governments that have been overthrown through a military process, they will not be recognized. Hence you find that Sudan, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, Guinea-Conakry, they are not recognized at the AU. So it will be important to say this transition integrates the youth concerns and also the youth leadership.
Advocate, you've mentioned Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, and obviously on Burkina Faso, when you see what is happening there with its president, Ibrahim Traoré, a lot of satisfaction from the citizens. So he solved the issues of basic service delivery and, of course, innovations that are coming from that country. Then, of course, there is the complete opposite to it, where you've seen many military-led governments within Africa, and I want to touch on Sudan, where it's not happening. With the case of Sudan, of course, we are now in a civil war, a very deadly civil war that is occurring right over there. When do African leaders learn that it's about service to the people and that power is not the be-all and end-all? Can that be a lesson for African leaders when we look what is currently happening right now? You've mentioned Kenya, you've mentioned Morocco. The youth are taking to the streets and they want to be heard.
Absolutely, but for us, let's change. Maybe they don't need to learn, they need to unlearn so that they may relearn. You know, sometimes it's to unlearn that the master script, you sometimes have to interrupt it, disrupt it, and say that the effects of independence and colonialism in the late 60s and towards the 1990s have changed. We are in the 21st century where Africa must find resonance to peace, justice, equality. And the young people, like I said, they are at the center. Once you don't center the young people anywhere, and the role of women leadership in Africa also, and the issue that I said to you earlier of military and civilian relations, that the military does not have the appetite of being at the state house, but they belong to the barracks. It is very important. And as we talk about Traore also, it is important also for the leadership of the Sahel and of Sudan also to learn from many African countries that have allowed that there is a separation of powers in some instances. And it is important to put development of the young people at the center. And that's why it is important also for us to understand that even the media coverage of African conflicts for us, it is a bit skewed. You know, if you look at how Sudan has been in conflict since 2023 now, but we see the conflict focusing only in the Middle East, in Russia and Ukraine, and we now tend to forget that African conflicts in the DRC, in Sudan, both north and south. And that's where I say the issue of leadership deficit. We should maybe move away from this mantra of we want to pray for our leaders. Maybe we should start to train our leaders, go for refresher courses of leadership skills, and also empowering the youth. That concept of intergenerational leadership of the youth is very important in the African continent if we want to see Africa being peaceful and developmental towards 2063 or towards 2050.
Advocate Mantula, obviously when we see takeovers occurring in African countries, in most cases it's being done by the military. Where do we draw the line in terms of military coups, military takeover, however you want to put it, in terms of having a change in government? Let's not forget, around about this time, 8 years ago, right next door to us, in the north of the SADC region, we had a sort of military takeover of Zimbabwe, and of course it saw Robert Mugabe being deposed as the president, and we now have new leadership that has occurred within Zimbabwe. So where do we draw the line in terms of, yes, wanting the change, but it being not done by the military, which could have two effects, either it being peaceful or it being done through violence?
No, Faraz, let me just take you through that journey. There are many definitions of coups. We should not always think of the military coup or the mutiny. You have the palace coup. You have the coup that takes its basis from the popular uprising of the youth. And now when the military comes, military, remember, has got ammunition, resources. They are capable to can take over government at any time. But the population does not have those resources. The only resource they have, it is their voice, and it is their mind, and it is their energy to can confront the governments. Now, if you look at the different coups that have happened in the African continent, I think since the 1940s, 1960s actually, until now, we had more than 200 coups.
And that's a large number.
Coups, that is a large number, and Madagascar had 5, by the way. Let's stick to Madagascar. Madagascar had 5 coups so far. And you have countries in African diaspora like Haiti, they had more than 10 coups. Now, most of these coups is also the failure of government. Some of the coups, like I said, it's a palace coup. It also comes from motion of no confidence that comes from the same ruling party in their parliament. So you have parliamentary coups also. You have a coup that you can take over through parliament. Where you ask, remember when Jacob Zuma was removed? He was pushed to resign, even if there were more than 8 motions of no confidence against him. You had a coup, as we have said, in Zimbabwe. Whether was it a coup or not a coup? Others, they say it was not a coup because Zimbabwe had not signed the African Charter on Elections, Democracy, and Governance. So again, you are also having a measuring tape, what I'll call a measure when you want to say, was this a coup or not a coup? But we know, Faraz, once you occupy the state broadcaster, once you go to the state house, once you dissolve parliament, those are the signs of an unconstitutional change of government, even if we are playing with semantics, whether it's a constitutional government or an unconstitutional change of government, military coups are also being pushed by the by the pull and the push factors of the socio-economic challenges that the citizens are facing, and hence they don't rely on elections only. They don't wait for another 5 years to vote. They opt to say, either you resign or we will overthrow you. And that's how you have seen that for us to understand the culture of military coups, or many coups that I've explained, that we have many kinds and types of coups, by the way. You look at the coups that happen in Somalia, not Somalia, in the Sahel, actually, Niger, Burkina Faso, again, and Mali and Guinea-Conakry. They happen because all those military elite units, they were at the back of the president. So they could understand the framework of the misgovernance that was happening, the bad governance that was happening. And what they do, they gain popular support. So many military coups, they don't just happen from the sky. There's always a coordinated plan. And the young people, they become an added element on it when they support. As you saw in most of the Sahelian states, whenever there was a military coup, there will always be the raising of the flag from Russia. There will also be the burning of a flag of France. And look at Madagascar and the Sahel. Madagascar, again, France are the ones who are calling for national dialogue. They are the ones who allegedly evacuated President Rajoelina. So you can still see that there is still that toxic relationship of the colonized and the colonizer.
Advocate Mantula, absolute pleasure having you, and thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much, my brother. Asante sana.
That's Advocate Sipho Mantula, researcher at the Thabo Mbeki African School on Public and International Affairs, and yes, a true expert when it comes to African affairs. After the break, we're going to be staying when it comes to youth protests, because 10 years ago marked the start of the fees must fall movement when it came to higher education, high fees that were being paid by the students. And one of them, of course, one of the students that took part in it was Busisiwe Siabe. I'm going to be speaking to her after the break.